This is a story time about fairy tale story time about the history of dragons and Dragonslayers. It's told by Darius the Green Angel. Your favorite, anime influencer, enthusiast, whatever. Your favorite, astrologer on the side, right? So this is a story time today, right? So a long, long time ago in Fiore, right? The continent where they live. But this was 400 years in the past, right? There were two factions in the dragons. The dragons that wanted to eat humans. They used them as, fuel, food, a food source. They were seen as nothing more than a food source for the dragons. And they were like, hey, this is our food. We don't, give a fuck about them any other way. But there was other dragons that wanted to stand up and fight for what's called coexistence. They didn't hate the human beings, and they were like, we will fight on your behalf. The battle was, really it was neck and neck. There was, you know, dragons on that side, dragons on that side. I don't know for sure if they said if the other dragons had more, but dragons that were fighting for the humans were like, we will do that because we live in a world with human beings and it's fine. We're the higher creatures. We're the more superior beings or whatever. So it's our job to defend you guys, and not just destroy you people and annihilate you, And then a human being by the name of Irene Belsarion, she came up and she said, okay, I propose the idea of you giving me your magic. See, this dragon's name was Belsarion, right? The sage dragon. And he was like, well, if I give you the power, this shit's never been done before. And she's like, well, this will turn the tide of the battle. And humans with dragon slaying abilities came out of this, and she became the first dragon slayer, the mother of all dragon slayers, Irene Belsarion, and later also Urza's mother. But the humans and the dragons, fought against one another, right? And also around this time, one of the first dragon slayers that came to be was Acnologia. He was like a doctor for a village. His dragon's name was Acnologia. You know, they kind of adopted the names of their dragons and shit. These first dragon slayers that I'm talking about. You know, Acnologia ended up dying, and then he ended up going on a killing spree. Acnologia. His human name was unknown, but he was a human that became a dragon because he ended up running around slaying dragons and bathing in their blood because he just got addicted to it. Like, and it was ridiculous. And the event became known as the Dragon King Festival, and he became the king of all dragon kind. But Irene Belsarion was still out there too. She was fighting against the other side, the side that was against, humans, right? Igneo was also fighting for, coexistence along with the other dragons. Skiadrum, Weisslogia, the dark dragon, Skiadrum, and Weisslogia, the white dragon. Um, Metallicana and Grandina. Grandina, the wind dragon, and then Metallicana, the metal dragon. You know, these dragons turn the tide of the battle. But for the Dragon Slayers, there were some downsides. As I said before, Agnelia became a dragon. He had dragon slaying abilities, right? His dragon wasn't the most powerful, hence why he died. But besides that fact, this is the main point I'm trying to bring up with you. This dragon slayer ended up becoming a dragon because the cells, they ended up with dragon cells in their body, and then their body just couldn't handle it because when they use the dragon's magic, they become a dragon themselves. So they needed a way to combat that and make it so the humans wouldn't become dragons themselves. So the first generation dragon slayers, as we know, Because these are Agnologia and Irene were like the first ones. You can see it like Agnologia is like the father of all Dragonslayers, and then Irene Belceron's the mother of all Dragonslayers. That's how I would like to equate it. You know, and they did their own thing. They went into hiding. Well, Agnologia went around fighting other dragons for as long as he could until his goal was to be the last one standing. But Irene ended up going and going into seclusion. They tried to chain her up and other things. The man that she that got her pregnant was Urza's father, but he was like, she's become a monster, a beast, just like these dragons. I don't know her. That's not the woman I fell in love with. She ended up flying away, and she hid in seclusion for a long time. And eventually, Zeref found her. But before that happened, Zeref created Natsu. Natsu was his brother. But he was created from Aetherius. He was a demon essentially. Natsu was, but he was brought back to life, and then he became a dragon slayer under the tutelage of Igneo, and he was, his mentor in the dragon slaying arts. And Natsu knew that to be his father, from that day forward. And then Igneo taught Natsu fire dragon slaying magic. Logia taught Sting. Skiadrum taught Rogue. Windy learned from Grandina, and then Metallicana taught Gagio, their dragon slaying magics. So all that shit happened, and then Layla, or not Layla, Anna Hartfilia. That's what her name was. In the other video I made like last week or a couple weeks ago, I was like forgetting her name. But Anna was like, Zera's friend back in those days. And they hatched a plan to send the Dragon Slayers into the future to fight against Acnologia. Now they knew of a spell that would keep Natsu, Windy, Gagio, Rogue, and Sting from turning into dragons. So they tracked themselves. The dragons trapped themselves inside of their Dragon Slayers for safety, so that they could fight the cells that were trying to grow inside of them and keep them at bay. But they had to like go inside of their Dragon Slayers and like, I don't know, through some type of spell. And they were there unknowingly. Like the Dragon Slayers weren't aware of it. Like in their mind, they were sent. They didn't even know they were sent into the future. 400 years. Natsu, Windy, Rogue, Gagil, and Sting. They didn't have no idea. They just remember the year 777 on the 7th day of the 7th month, July 7th, 777. Their dragons all disappeared. And like that's when the gate opened on the other side from Layla Hartfilia, Lucy's mother. And she, opened the gate on the other side. And they were scattered across the land. All 5 Dragon Slayers. And these were the first generation Dragon Slayers. However, it was only Natsu, Windy, and Gagio that were first generation. Now later we would say that the 2, Sting and Rogue would be 3rd generation Dragon Slayers, and there's a reason why. I'll talk about that. But those Dragon Slayers ended up founding guilds and other things, right? Windy was found by Mystigan, who was there from another world. He was from, Edalus, and he was there trying to close up enemas. But he found Windy as like a young, like 5-year-old, 3-year-old girl, or whatever. And he took her to, Cake Shelter. And then she became a member of that. Gagio just ran around being like, a vagrant, I guess. He became a bad guy, a bad boy. He ended up going into dark guilds and other things. He loved like breaking shit and vandalizing shit. He didn't have any like good role models, and then Natsu got grabbed up by Fairy Tail, and then they, ended up putting him on a good path or whatever, right? But he still had his ways about him too. He started vandalizing shit too. See, these are Dragon Slayers. Magic is powerful, and it's lost magic at this point in time, right? and all the Dragonslayers, those three at least, did what they did, right? Um, but now that I talked about Natsu and Gaji and Wendy and how they got to the time period they got to, right? Later on, we watch Fairy Tail and Natsu fights against certain foes. He even fights against Gajio and defeats Gajio, who's also a Dragon Slayer. Ask him about the year 777, or 777, July 7th, 777, and he's like, yeah, my dragon disappeared on me too. I never found him. They just left, and it was like the side effect of that magic. But they at that point in time they didn't know. So later they fought against a guy named Loxus. Loxus is my favorite character, right? He's known to have lightning slayer magic, lightning dragon slayer magic, right? But this guy is not a dragon slayer like that. Like, he didn't learn dragon slaying magic from the dragon himself. So what happened with him was they took the dragon's magic and they put it inside of an orb called a lacrima, and then implanted it inside of his body, and that's how he became the lightning dragon slayer. you know. And Natsu ended up fighting against him, and it was a really fucking hard fought battle. Even Gajio had to help him fight against Loxus, and it was close, because even after the end of it, Natsu was, bandaged up. Gajio was bandaged up, and Loxus was too, but he was still walking around fine on his 2 feet. You know, those two were like on crutches and shit, and they had broken arms and shit. But he was still, walking around, getting around. I'm just saying that to say that Loxus, even though he didn't learn dragon slaying magic from a dragon, he still like knew his powers very well and shit, to the degrees of being an S-class wizard in the guild. And then he got expelled. But then, in the next arc, they fought against a Dragon Slayer too, or Natsu did at least. His name was Cobra, and see, he had the ability of poison Dragon Slayer magic, and just like Loxus, he's a second generation Dragon Slayer. So this guy got his lacrima placed inside of him, I think by like 0 or whatever, right? Because he was looking for 6 warriors, right? To, he calls to him and become members of the Irrational States, and he met that, requirement. He was found at the Tower of Heaven and everything else, and then he also had a snake. So then, 2 and 2 together, he was like, this guy can be the poison dragon slayer, and he got the lacrima put inside of him, and he was the poison dragon slayer. And that's now 7 dragon slayers out there. Later, we skip way the fuck ahead, right? Or Wendy was in that arc too, but that's when they met Wendy, and she was recruited to Fairy Tail like Gajio, and then all 3 of them were in. All the first generation Dragon Slayers were part of Fairy Tail. Loxus came back to Fairy Tail after Tenro Island, and then Cobra was imprisoned, in the Magic Council, right? And then 7 years later, they talk about Sabretooth being the most powerful guild in the land, and it's because of Sting and Rogue. They're 3rd generation Dragon Slayers. Their dragons, Logia and Skiadrum, put different spells on them. They were implanted with Dragon Slayer lacrimas as well. So they learned dragon slaying magic from their dragons, Logia and Skiadrum, right? And not just that, the dragon put themselves inside of Sting and Rogue, and then they implanted the lacrimas inside of them too, and gave them the memories of them slaying their dragons. So Logia was defeated by Sting, and then Rogue defeated Skiadrum, like killed them, like a Dragon Slayer should. And and that's what they told Natsu and Gajio, and they were like, yeah, we killed our dragons. You were on good terms with your dragons, but we killed ours. And then he was like, they're like, how could you do that? Our dragons raised us up, and, we're like our parents and shit, and we, miss them, but you act like it's just like a game and shit. And he's like, well, we are Dragon Slayers. And they ended up fighting against each other in the Grand Magic Games. Natsu unlocked, second origin abilities, which amplified his dragon slaying magic, and he defeated Sting and Rogue. And Natsu was also able to acquire 2 attributes, just like Gajio, by eating the element of another Dragon Slayer. Only Natsu and Gajil have done shit like that though. They're the only two Dragon Slayers to do shit like that. But oh wait, no. Rogue did too. Rogue and Sting did too. I almost forgot. White Shadow Dragon Slaying magic, because that's the future Rogue arc, which came next. And future Rogue is just Rogue from the future. He came back through the Eclipse Gate, which is like a time gate. He came from 7 years in the future to the past to, eradicate Acnologia and also get revenge on everybody, Gray and everybody else. All because of Frosh died, and then he was just upset, so he wanted to get his revenge, and then kill Acnologia too, and be the most powerful Dragon Slayer in existence. He killed Sting in his timeline and obtained White Dragon Slaying magic and became the White Shadow Dragon Slayer. But then, after all that shit happened, the fourth generation Dragon Slayers were these people from another island, I think. That was that movie. These people were equipped with the powers of Dragon Slayers, but I'm kind of not I don't understand how that works. It's not like a lacrima or a teaching from a dragon. It's these people are spawned from the dragon's influences on them or something like that. But they're the fourth generation. The fourth generation is weird, and it's kind of not canon and shit. So then there's the fifth generation, but that comes way later. But there's another Dragon Slayer. I almost forgot about this Dragon Slayer. This Dragon Slayer's name is oh wait, before I talk about the dragons, all Agnologia attacked Tenro Island, but Mavis saved Tenro Island. By that point, Agnologia was known to be a beast because Gildarts was yeah, this guy is too powerful. He ripped my arm and leg off, tore some of my guts out, and I don't even know if you can take him on, Natsu. And Natsu couldn't back then. And then during the time of Tartaros, when they fought Tartaros at the end of it all, right, the dragons sprung forward to destroy the face system, and they did. Skiadrum, Weisslogia, Grandina, Metalcana, and Ignil. Ignil fought against Agnologia, and he ended up dying. He died, and the other dragons, dissipated into the air or the ether, right? Because after that spell was undone, they came out to destroy the face system. But they resided within their Dragon Slayers long enough to where they wouldn't have to worry about becoming dragons, because they were inside of their Dragon Slayers for at least 10 years. So the process of them becoming a dragon would never happen. So they didn't have to worry about that. They wouldn't become like Acnologia or Irene Belsarion. But there's another Dragon Slayer, God Serena. So in the next arc called Alvarez Empire arc, God Serena left Fiore and became one of the 12 Brigand. Now, he was known to have 8 Dragon Slaying Lacrimas implanted in him. So he had the powers of 8 Dragon Slay, or 8 dragons. He never met a dragon, he never killed a dragon before in his life, but he had 8 types of Dragon Slaying magic, and he was pretty damn good at using it. But he ended up losing to Acnologia. Acnologia is one who knows all magic, essentially, because he killed so many types of dragons, so many dragons that he lost count. And his skin became basically impenetrable. He's the definition of the tank in Fairy Tale. There's nobody who's more of a tank than him. Not even Zeref on some real shit. Some people might think that's debatable, but I don't think so. Because when everybody had to come together at the end of the arc, every single character from Fairy Tale, every episode, it showed every single character that they ever seen or fought against. It was just at the end of the Boo Saga, right? everybody put their hands in the air and shit. They did that for the fairy sphere, so they could box this guy in. Not just members of Fairy Tale, but everywhere, all over the world and shit. They had to put their magic together to suppress this animal, and then Natsu defeated Acnologia in another dimension, the rift between time. Um, and then after that, dragons were no more. Um, is what they thought. 100 Years Quest, opens up other things, more dragons and more Dragonslayers. This is another story, right? This is, it's not another story. It's a continuation of Fairy Tale. It's very interesting too. I've been watching it, but I want to talk about that later. I want to talk about that after season 2 comes out, or whatever. Once season 2 is made, I'll talk about that. But I will tell you this: the 5th generation Dragonslayers are Dragonslayers who eat dragons, like eat their skin and obtain their abilities, like cook them and eat them like burgers and shit. Like, I'm gonna eat this dragon's flesh and then gain its abilities. But they like work a system in that guild called Diablos, where you hunt the dragon and eat it. But like the guild master, he designates who gets to eat it. I want to eat it, or I want you to, eat it and become the dragon slayer of whatever attribute or element type or whatever. There ends up being a blade dragon slayer, which is some girl, some scarlet dragon slayer, which is a guy, um, and then 2 other guys. A guy who uses, I think it's Ash Dragon Slayer magic. There's like a couple of them actually, and these people are on another continent. See, there's Alvarez, or Ishgar, or not Ishgar, but Alcatacia, and then Ishgar or Fiore. Those 2 continents, and then there's the other place. I don't remember what it's called, but in Fairy Tale 100 Years Quest, they have 5th generation Dragon Slayers, and they're powerful. Um, you know. But Fairy Tail is still, on top and everything else. And the 1st generation Dragon Slayers, I would say, for the most part, they're the best. You know, it basically comes down to how the Dragon Slayer uses the magic, and then the dragons themselves. They were basically annihilated by Acnologia, and they fled to. And that's the thing they said, brought up in 100 Years Quest. They fled to Gitinia, or whatever that continent's called, and Giltina. That's what it's called, Giltina. They fled to that continent to get away from Acnologia during the time he was like running shit on them in Fiore. That was Igneal's son, Ignea, Mercphobia, Alderon, Verenes, and Selene. Those 5 became known as the 5 dragon gods, and apparently there's another one too. But they went to another continent to stay away from Acnologia. But like when they got there, they were so powerful, they grew in strength and other things. And these dragons even became so powerful they could do the shit that Acnologia did and take on a human form. But see, they're different than Acnologia because guess what? They were already dragons. People revered them as gods on that continent. And they were so powerful that they could take on a human form then after, as dragons, being born as dragons. And then through years of fighting and honing their magical abilities, they could then, become, like, take on a human form and, like, play games with humans and shit. But, they're powerful. They're on, like, Acnologia's level, but I wouldn't say they're, more powerful than Acnologia. I still think he's the most powerful. They needed Mad Hacks to defeat him. But they might be, because the 100 Years Quest is still an ongoing manga as well. But that's the story of, Dragons and Dragon Slayers as told by Darius the Green Angel. Be cool on the corner and watch Fairy Tail, so then you can watch Fairy Tail 100 Years Quest. That animation's pretty alright. And it's a good show, I like it because of, same thing. Once you watched it, you'll know why I like it. But be cool, call in the corner.